Research paradigms are the philosophical frameworks or underpinnings that inform the aims, the process, and outcomes of the process of research. What is a research paradigm and what are its different types? We have already discussed that in some previous presentations in this space. The current presentation is aimed at an introduction to a relatively newer research paradigm, that is the transformative research paradigm. So what is the transformative research paradigm and what are its simple examples? This is what we will briefly discuss in this presentation. So first of all, a transformative research paradigm is basically a research paradigm or a research framework that aims at conducting research that seeks to explore and address issues of social justice, equity or inequity, and marginalization. Generally, the emphasis of transformative research paradigms or research endeavors that are led by the transformative research paradigm is to develop collaboration, to bring in inclusivity, and to be culturally responsive to the research settings. Now, there are certain things that the transformative research paradigm challenges, and so these include challenging traditional power dynamics. For example, the power relationship between the researcher and the participants. So in a traditional research setting, generally it is the researcher who drives the process of research, who develops the aims of the research, and the participants just serve as subjects. But in this case, in the transformative research paradigm, the focus is on advocating for the co-creation of knowledge between the researcher and those who participate in the process of research. The aim is to empower basically marginalized communities who become research participants, and to drive a change as a result of the research process. Generally, in this case, the research is basically considered a moral and ethical practice that aims at bringing in improvement in the lives of marginalized communities. The assumptions behind the transformative research paradigm is that knowledge is value-laden, and that researchers have a responsibility not just to explore and present facts and figures, but also to work towards ensuring social justice or economic justice through the use of the data or the findings or the process of their research. Now, epistemologically, transformative research is basically based on the idea that knowledge can be co-constructed through the collaborative relationship between the researcher and the participants. Secondly, ontologically speaking, reality or social reality in this case is shaped by the social, the cultural, the political and historical context in which the research is taking place. And so these contexts are actually experienced differently by the marginalized communities in comparison to the dominant sections of the society. Thirdly, in terms of the axiological considerations of transformative research, it is important for the transformative researchers to ensure ethical considerations such as respect for inclusion and equity during the research process. And lastly, methodological considerations of the transformative research involves an emphasis on the participatory and action-oriented methods, where the aim is basically to explore phenomena and then to bring positive or constructive change in the lives of the participants of research. Here are some examples of the transformative research. For example, the first one, aiming at ensuring educational equity. So the focus of this research, for example, is to explore barriers to education for marginalized groups. For example, in many cases in developing countries context, in rural, girls in rural areas could be one of the marginalized groups in terms of education. Similarly, ethnic minorities and individuals with disabilities could be some of the marginalized communities in terms of their access to education or to quality education. So this could be one of the important areas that transformative researchers could explore. The general methodology in this will be that data could be collected using focus groups with students, for example, and teachers and parents to understand cultural barriers to the process of education. Similarly, generally, transformative research aims at using multiple or mixed method research, and the aim is to analyze both qualitative and narrative and quantitative enrollment, for example, enrollment data. Thirdly, we could also make use of emancipatory action research, where the aim is to design basically interventions like, for example, teacher training programs or community awareness campaigns with certain institutions, such as, for example, schools aimed at the education of marginalized communities. This particular research will be aimed at something, and so there should be an outcome. What will be that outcome is basically empowering communities to challenge the systematic barriers to education of the marginalized communities and to improve access to quality education. Now, here is another example that is, for example, a transformative researcher is interested in exploring gender-based violence, but not just exploring, but also coming up with strategies to reduce or eliminate the gender-based violence as a social phenomenon. So, for example, in this case, we can explore the lived experiences of women and girls affected by gender-based violence. It could be the very opposite. In some cases, maybe the opposite gender or the third people from the third gender might be exposed to gender-based violence, and so we could explore those issues. So again, we could conduct narrative inquiries to document survivors' experiences. So we could explore the narratives or the life stories of those who have been exposed to gender-based violence. We can work with NGOs to design action-oriented solutions against gender-based violence. We could involve community advocacy members, and we could also take legal support. The outcome of this type of research, again, will be advocacy for policy reforms in order to deal with the gender-based violence in the society. A third example could be related to environmental justice, for example. Again, here is an agenda, and the agenda is to bring in environmental justice. So in this case, for example, the focus is on investigating the disproportionate impact of environmental degradation on marginalized communities. So as we know that in a society there are different types of communities, and any type of degradation, including environmental degradation, might have a disproportionate impact on the marginalized communities because they don't have the means or the sources to protect themselves against such marginalization and degradation. So in this case, for example, we can employ ethnographic studies where we can go into a particular marginalized community area and we can document there in the community's experiences, for example, with climate change that has come as a result of, for example, industrialization in a particular area. We could also make use of GIS mapping to highlight areas affected by environmental injustice. And we could also, as researchers, partner with community groups to develop advocacy strategy in order to deal with the degradation of the communities, the environment of those communities that are marginalized. Overall, the outcome of this research will be basically to come up with policy briefs and initiatives that can promote sustainable development practices. So these are three simple examples from various fields. Now, as with other research designs and research paradigms, this research paradigm has certain strengths and challenges. So we will briefly discuss those strengths. First of all, the focus of this research, this paradigm is basically on social justice, which is an important social undertaking. So it addresses systematic inequities and promotes fairness in the society in terms of social justice. That's why it is like one of its strengths. Secondly, it involves the empowerment of the marginalized groups. And so they are considered as co-creators of knowledge rather than just consumers of knowledge or sources of research and knowledge. So the researchers can collaborate with them rather than using them as subjects for their research. Thirdly, the transformative paradigm is important because it produces practical outcomes for real world change. So we can say it's a kind of applied research that has practical results. And so practical implications for especially for the marginalized community. It also involves ethical reflexivity where the researchers critically examine their biases and their power dynamics in terms of their relationship with the marginalized communities or their subjects that they include in their research. So bringing in that ethical responsibility is one of the reflections to the researcher is very important. And lastly, it is a flexible research paradigm which combines diverse methods. It can use qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method research designs because the aim is actually understanding the situations and then coming up with some practical solutions to those problems that the marginalized communities are facing. But besides its strengths, this research paradigm also has certain challenges. There could be, for example, an element of subjectivity on the part of the researchers where there could be risk of bias and lack of generalizability, mainly because these types of research paradigms are aimed at practical solutions to problems and ensuring social justice rather than the creation of a general scientific theory. Secondly, there could be a need for long-term engagement and substantial resources. So it could be quite costly in that sense and resource demanding. Resistance, again, because the aim is ensuring social justice, and so actually exploring those elements or those factors that are standing in the way of socioeconomic justices. That is why there are chances of pushbacks from institutions or systems or societies or maybe individuals who are benefiting from the status quo, because transformative paradigms generally are aimed at challenging status quo. So there could be challenges coming because of this. Ethical complexities could also be involved, where it could be often difficult for researchers to navigate the cultural sensitivities of particular communities in which they are working, especially in ethnographic situations, and the power imbalances between the researcher, for example, and those that they are conducting their research on, or the subjects. And lastly, there could be ambiguity in terms of methods, because in transformative research paradigms, generally there is use of multiple methods, mixed method research designs, various data collection and analysis methods. So this flexibility of methodologies could bring in lack of clarity and rigor. So that is something that the transformative researchers need to take care of while they are conducting this particular type of research.